Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a brand new Anime Paradox X tier list, updated for the re-release and featuring all of the newest units. I'll be ranking every single unit based on their evolved forms, while assuming they all have the best possible stat rolls. To keep things fair, every unit will be judged in the role they're actually meant to fill, whether that's DPS, support, or farm. As always, this isn't just a list where I throw units into random tiers and move on. I'll explain exactly why every unit earned its spot, what makes it strong, where it struggles, and whether it's worth investing your resources into. So if you're wondering which units deserve your gems, essences, and time after the re-release, you're in the right place. Let's jump straight into the tier list and see who dominates the current meta. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking units in Anime Paradox X. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching! The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Melio Wrath, Chasso Bloodbath, Chei in Light, Friezo, and Asto Devil. If you've been waiting for a hidden monster to suddenly appear in D tier, this is the part where reality gently taps you on the shoulder. These units aren't terrible by any means, but they all have one thing in common. There's usually someone else who can do their job a little better. Starting with Melio in his rough form, he's capable of putting out some respectable damage per second, so you won't feel completely powerless using him. The problem is that once you look beyond the damage, there's not much else to get excited about. He doesn't bring meaningful utility to the team, making him difficult to justify over stronger all-around options. If you do decide to build him, the vampiric trait is definitely the way to go. Next up is Chasso with Bloodbath, and this one is a bit of a mixed bag. His entire identity revolves around stacking marks on bosses until they explode for a percentage of the target's maximum health. On paper, that sounds absolutely ridiculous, and honestly, it kind of is. Watching those explosions go off feels satisfying every single time. Unfortunately, the actual payoff isn't impressive enough compared to what higher tier units can already do without jumping through extra hoops. He's a fun boss hunter, but fun doesn't always earn a permanent spot on the team. Just like Melio, Vampiric is the best trait to maximize his performance. Then we have Chei-In using the light form. She's one of those units that makes a pretty good first impression because her passive gives her solid damage per second during the opening waves. You might even think you found an underrated pick. But as the match continues, that excitement starts fading away faster than your snacks during a long grinding session. Once her passive loses its impact, her damage drops off, and she doesn't provide any meaningful support or utility to compensate. She's usable, but she struggles to stay relevant throughout the entire run. Vampiric is once again the recommended trait here. Moving on to Friezo, this unit almost tricks you into believing he's stronger than he actually is. His self-buff is decent enough and gives him a nice boost, but the real source of his damage comes from Explosive Aura. The issue is that Explosive Aura has a painfully long cooldown, leaving Friezo spending too much time waiting instead of actually dealing damage. It's like owning a sports car that only starts every few minutes. When everything lines up, he looks great, but consistency wins games, and that's exactly where he falls behind. If you're investing in him anyway, Vampiric remains the best choice. Finally, there's Asto in his Devil form, who is probably the most balanced unit in this tier. He combines respectable damage per second with useful team support, making him a decent hybrid option. If you don't own stronger units like Kirua or Ulquiorra, Asto can absolutely fill that role without embarrassing himself. The only reason he stays in D tier is because his damage isn't quite high enough to compete with the game's best damage dealers, and his support isn't game-changing either. He's reliable, just not exceptional. As expected, Vampiric is still the trait you should be aiming for if you want to get the most value out of him. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Joigu Volcanic, Bacardi Gambler, Sky Enhanced, Seth One-Winged, and Goran Mystic. C tier is where things start getting a lot more interesting because these units actually have some real strengths. The problem isn't that they're weak, it's that they all come with a catch. If you're still building your roster, several of these characters can absolutely carry their weight, but once your account gets stronger, you'll probably find yourself replacing them. Let's kick things off with Joigu in his Volcanic form. He's a solid area of effect damage per second option if you're missing the top meta units. His active abilities hit surprisingly hard, the burn damage adds up nicely over time, and he even throws in a little slowing effect to help the team. That's enough utility to make him a great temporary carry while you're working towards stronger units. For traits, Vampiric is definitely the best choice. Now let's talk about Bacardi with Gambler, who might have one of the most fitting names in the entire game. Every time you use him, you're basically telling the game, let's see what happens. Fever Rush sounds amazing in theory, but it just doesn't activate consistently enough. And even when it does, the payoff isn't as crazy as you'd hope. Thankfully, Lucky Streak became much better after its fixes, especially since it works well with his area of effect attacks. Even so, you're still relying on random chance, and winning that gamble doesn't increase his damage per second enough to compete with higher tier units. If you're planning to invest in him, Eternal is the trait you'll want. Then we have Sky in his enhanced form, and this unit asks you to work really hard before he starts rewarding you. To get the most out of him, you need to place him on the front line because he builds stacks both by attacking enemies and by getting hit himself. Once those stacks reach the maximum, he transforms into a monster for 12 seconds with huge boosts to damage, attack speed, and cooldown reduction before the whole process starts over again. Sounds awesome, right? Well, getting there is the difficult part. Outside of Infinite Mode, he takes far too long to reach his full potential and demands way too much setup from the rest of your team. Eternal is easily his best trait. Seth in his one-winged form falls into a similar category. He's a perfectly respectable damage per second option if your roster is missing stronger carries. His biggest strength is being able to trigger his skills twice, creating some really satisfying burst damage. Unfortunately, those skills have long cooldowns, so the excitement doesn't last very long. His passive also wants him to stay at low health for maximum damage, but unlike Sung Jin Woo, Seth doesn't have lifesteal to keep himself alive. That means you're almost forced to bring a dedicated healer just to keep him functioning properly. He can absolutely shine in certain situations, but compared to more reliable damage dealers, he's simply too demanding. Eternal is once again the recommended trait. Finally, let's finish with Gohan in his Mystic form, who completely ignores the usual damage per second competition. His damage output is honestly pretty disappointing, and you definitely shouldn't bring him expecting him to carry your waves. Instead, Gohan earns his spot because he's one of the strongest support units available in Anime Paradox X. Sometimes making everyone else stronger is far more valuable than trying to top the damage chart yourself, and that's exactly where Gohan excels. If you're using him the way he's meant to be played, you'll get far more value than his damage numbers would ever suggest. Just make sure to pair him with the Eternal trait to maximize his supporting potential. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Kashimu Electric, 2G Heavenly Pact, CL Super, Oma Evo or Kuyaro Murcielago, Jin Betrayal, SSJ3 Roku Full Power, and Meiyin Vegetable Pride. B tier is where you start finding units that can genuinely carry your account for a long time. These aren't just good enough picks anymore. Several of them can compete with much higher tier characters under the right conditions, but each one has a specific weakness that keeps them from climbing even further. If you're missing the absolute meta units, this is a very comfortable place to build your team. Starting with Kashimu in his electric form, this guy becomes much stronger than he first appears. To get the most value, you need to keep him on the front line so he always has enemies nearby and can maintain his damage buff. Since every 5th attack deals bonus damage, attack speed buffs scale incredibly well with his kit. Once everything starts clicking, Kashimu can ramp into one of the strongest mythic units available. Vampiric is easily the best trait for him. Next up is 2G with Heavenly Pact, and sometimes simple really is better. He doesn't rely on complicated mechanics or strange setups. Instead, he delivers reliable damage per second in almost every game mode. One of his biggest advantages is being immune to damage caused by enemy abilities, making him much safer than many other damage dealers. On top of that, he deals extra damage to enemies with active buffs, and every 4th attack unleashes an additional burst of damage that works beautifully with attack speed traits and support buffs. He's straightforward, dependable, and incredibly consistent. Once again, Vampiric is the ideal trait. Ciel in his super form is probably one of the easiest recommendations for newer players. His evolution is very easy to obtain, and he stays useful throughout every upgrade stage instead of needing to be fully maxed before becoming relevant. Every defeated enemy makes him stronger by increasing both his damage and health, and once he reaches maximum stacks, he even heals himself while boosting his attack speed. That's already impressive, but his biggest power spike comes when one of his upgrades turns him into a full area of effect attacker. That single upgrade completely changes how effective he feels. While the strongest meta units eventually outperform him, Ciel remains one of the best beginner investments in Anime Paradox X. Vampiric is the trait you'll want to use. Omar in his evolution form is a much more specialized pick. His damage and attack speed continue increasing the more often he gets hit, and whenever his health drops below 60%. That sounds risky, and honestly, it is. He needs a fairly specific setup to perform at his best, but when everything comes together, he can surprise you with solid damage output. Thanks to the Vampiric trait, he can continuously recover health and maintain his passive much more comfortably, making the entire strategy far more reliable. He's definitely not an everyday unit, but in the right situation, Oma can absolutely earn his spot. Ulquiorra in his Murcielago form takes a completely different approach by acting as a support and damage per second hybrid. His fear effect slows enemies by 40% in an area of effect every 8 kills, giving your team much better control over the battlefield. He's also incredibly durable because both applying fear and his high-speed regeneration passive restore his health. On top of that, keeping his health above 80% grants him an additional damage bonus, encouraging careful positioning instead of reckless aggression. While he can contribute respectable damage, his greatest value comes from supporting the rest of your team. Eternal is easily the best trait for him. Jhin in his Betrayal form is one of those units that quietly gets the job done. He provides respectable mid-range damage per second and fits nicely into early and mid-game teams without asking for much investment or complicated strategies. The downside is that his growth eventually hits a wall. As your roster becomes stronger and more specialized, Jhin simply can't keep up with the higher tier damage dealers available later in the game. He's an excellent stepping stone, but not someone you'll likely keep forever. If you plan on using him, Vampiric remains the strongest trait choice. Finally, let's group together Super Saiyan 3 Roku in his full power form and Majin Vegetable with Pride because they serve almost the exact same purpose. Outside of Dragon Ball Z content, they're simply respectable mid-tier damage per second units without anything particularly game-changing. However, if you're planning to farm Vegito and Gotenks through the Dragon Ball Z tower, these two become much more valuable since you'll specifically need Dragon Ball Z units for that mode. Because of that, they're worth giving strong traits if tower farming is one of your goals. Otherwise, they're solid performers but nothing extraordinary. As with most damage dealers in this tier, Vampiric is the best trait to equip. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Mahito True Form, Panther Grimjaw, Resurrection, Broly Super, Killua Godspeed, Natsu Lightning, Kisoge Bankai, Itochi Eternal Flame, Eryu Antithesis, Megomen Explosion, and Betu Parade. Now we're entering the territory where almost every unit feels like a win. A tier is packed with characters that can easily carry difficult content, and honestly, several of them are only a tiny step away from joining the absolute best units in Anime Paradox EX. If your team is built around these characters, you're already in great shape. The difference between a tier and S tier isn't that these units are weak. It's simply that the very best characters in the game are just a little more consistent or offer even more utility. Let's start with Mito in his true form. Even though he's on the lower end among secret units, he's still an outstanding boss killer. His 20% damage amplification debuff increases the damage dealt by your entire team, and once enemies fall below half health, he becomes even deadlier thanks to his execute-focused damage boost. Add in his impressive durability through Distorted Form's damage reduction and the reliable black flashes, and you've got a unit that excels against tough enemies. Vampiric is definitely the trait to use. Speaking of damage dealers, Panther Grimjaw in his Resurrection form is an absolute monster. He's widely considered one of the 3 strongest mythic units in the game, and it's easy to understand why. While Broly dominates as a tank and Killua shines as an offensive support hybrid, Grimjaw focuses almost entirely on dealing raw damage per second. That's his specialty, and he performs it incredibly well. Thanks to the Vampiric trait, he also has excellent survivability, allowing him to stay in fights much longer than most Glass Cannon characters. If your goal is simply watching health bars disappear, Grimjaw won't disappoint. Eryu comes close, but Grimjaw still holds the edge as the premier pure mythic damage per second unit. Broly in his super form earns his place among those elite mythics for completely different reasons. Instead of overwhelming enemies instantly, he gradually becomes stronger by stacking buffs every time he defeats opponents. That means he takes a little time before reaching full power, but once he does, he's incredibly difficult to stop. His durability is fantastic. His area of effect damage clears waves with ease, and he remains useful even in late game content like Infinite and Siege modes. For newer players, he's an excellent first tank, and for veterans, he continues providing tremendous value in longer battles. Eternal is unquestionably the best trait for him. Killua with Godspeed might be one of the most complete mythic units in the entire game. He's another member of that legendary top 3 mythic group because he combines outstanding damage per second with incredible support capabilities. Every attack has the potential to stun enemies, while his special markings amplify the damage enemies receive from your entire team. As if that weren't enough, every 8th attack activates his Godspeed buff, increasing both his damage and cooldown reduction. Thanks to his naturally high attack speed, this passive activates constantly, creating an endless cycle of massive damage. Vampiric is easily the strongest trait for maximizing his potential. Natsu in his lightning form proves that beginner-friendly doesn't have to mean weak. He's one of the best early game investments because he deals impressive burn damage that scales alongside other burn effects on your team. The more burn you stack, the stronger he becomes, and his passive even restores his own health, giving him excellent survivability without requiring constant support. He comfortably handles both single-target encounters and large enemy groups, making him an incredibly flexible unit during progression. Since his evolution is also easy to obtain through the Valentine shop, Natsu is a character that new players should absolutely prioritize. Vampiric is the obvious trait choice. Kisoge in his Bankai form, along with Itochi using Eternal Flame, and Eryu with Antithesis, all serve slightly different roles while remaining excellent mythic choices. Kisoge is an outstanding damage per second option for beginners and mid-game players who haven't unlocked the strongest secret units yet, making Eternal his ideal trait. Itochi delivers respectable mythic level damage while bringing additional utility through his passive, allowing him to contribute more than raw numbers alone, and he performs best with Vampiric. Eryu, meanwhile, is one of the strongest backline damage per second mythics available. If you prefer keeping your carries safely behind the front line while still dealing enormous damage, Eryu is one of the best options in the entire game, and Vampiric fits him perfectly. Megumin with Explosion is another character that newer players shouldn't overlook. She's surprisingly accessible thanks to Early Access Plus and the AFK Chamber, and her evolution isn't difficult to obtain either. Despite being easy to build, she delivers enormous burst damage whenever her explosions trigger, making her incredibly satisfying to use. She's one of those units that constantly exceeds expectations because people often underestimate her until they actually see the damage numbers. For anyone looking to strengthen a newer account quickly, Megumin is a fantastic investment, especially with the Vampiric trait equipped. Last but definitely not least, there's Betu with Parade, who wraps up A tier with an impressively balanced kit. His Dragon Companion and active abilities deal outstanding damage, placing him among the stronger mythic damage per second units in the game. He also boosts his own performance through self-buffs, keeps himself alive with built-in healing, and even helps protect nearby teammates by reducing enemy damage within his range. That combination of offense, survivability, and support makes Betu incredibly versatile and valuable in almost every team composition. If you're lucky enough to have him, pairing him with the Eternal trait turns him into one of the most dependable mythics available. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Brotenks Super, Dangai Ichuga Mugetsu, Ichuga Vasto Lorde, Sukuno Curse King, Bumta True Love, and Brosho Six Eyes. This is the point where every unit starts feeling unfair in the best possible way. S tier is filled with characters that can dominate nearly every game mode, and once you unlock them, you'll immediately understand why players spend so much time chasing them. They deal incredible damage per second, provide game-changing utility, or simply do everything at once. The only reason some of them aren't sitting in the meta tier is because there's an even smaller group of units that pushes the limits just a little further. Starting with Brotenks in his super form, he's unquestionably one of the strongest characters in anime Paradox X. The catch is that he's also one of the hardest units to obtain because he's locked behind the Dragon Ball Z Tower, which is widely considered the most difficult mode in the game. While he's incredibly powerful, focusing all your time on farming him isn't necessarily the most efficient strategy since other S tier units can reach very similar performance with far less effort. You'll most likely unlock Brotenks naturally while working toward Vegito anyway. Eternal is the best trait for maximizing his strength. Next up is Dangai Ichuga with Mugetsu, and this unit is basically the upgraded version of an already amazing character. If you've used the Vasto Lorde before, imagine taking everything that made it great and pushing it even further. Mugetsu delivers outstanding damage per second across every game mode and can even outperform Igris or Song Jin Woo in certain one-on-one comparisons. Of course, when those meta units are working together, they still come out ahead, but Mugetsu remains one of the strongest non-meta damage dealers available. If you're looking for a character that consistently performs at an elite level no matter what content you're playing, this is one of the safest investments you can make. Eternal is the trait you should aim for. Before reaching Mugetsu though, you'll almost certainly spend plenty of time with Ichuga in his Vasto Lorde form, and that's actually a very good thing. This evolution should be one of your biggest early game goals because it can carry your account deep into the endgame alongside Mahito. He's especially impressive during raids thanks to his bleed effects, which continuously increase his boss damage, while his self-buff and healing provide excellent survivability throughout long battles. Eventually, the strongest meta characters and Mugetsu will overtake him, but that doesn't change the fact that Vasto Lorde is one of the smartest long-term investments you can make during progression. Vampiric is easily his strongest trait. Sukuno in his Curse King form is another unit that completely transforms your account once you obtain him. Alongside Brojo, he's one of the biggest reasons players spend so much time farming the Jujutsu Kaisen portal, and honestly, it's worth every minute. His Malevolent Decree dramatically increases your entire team's damage by applying a powerful damage amplification debuff while also reducing the damage enemies deal back to you. Then there's Domain Expansion, which unleashes an enormous 1000% damage attack across the entire map. Even though his damage per second eventually falls slightly behind the absolute meta units in the late game, his utility keeps him valuable for an incredibly long time. Eternal is unquestionably the best trait for Sukuno. Bumtar with True Love proves that flashy mechanics aren't always necessary to become an S-tier character. His gameplay is actually fairly straightforward, but the raw numbers behind his kit are impossible to ignore. At maximum upgrades, each skill triggers 3 separate activations, creating incredible burst damage. On top of that, he becomes extremely difficult to kill thanks to his massive damage reduction whenever his health drops below 35%. Every attack also weakens enemy damage reduction, helping your entire team hit even harder, while his own damage buff stacks up to 40% surprisingly quickly as long as you keep him healed. Eternal is absolutely the trait to equip if you want to unlock his full potential. Finally, we have Brojo with 6 Eyes, and this is arguably the best damage per second and support hybrid in the entire game. His personal damage is already excellent, but that's only part of what makes him so special. Infinity slows enemies while increasing your damage output. Limitless Mastery supercharges his active abilities for devastating bursts, and once Domain Expansion becomes available, he unleashes a full area of effect stun that many players consider the single strongest support ability in Anime Paradox X. That's exactly why farming Acts 3 and 6 of the Jujutsu Kaisen portal should be one of your biggest priorities as soon as your team is strong enough. Brojo remains a cornerstone of endgame teams, and Eternal is the perfect trait to complete his build. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Super Vegito Transforming, Storic Resurrection, the Dindaishi, Azazshishin, Megumo 10 Shadows, Buu Kid, Borzen Final Form, Zid Atomic, Sonjinwoo Monarch, and Igris Elite Knight. Welcome to the part of the tier list where balance quietly leaves the room. S+ tier is reserved for the absolute monsters of Anime Paradox X. These are the units that completely change how you approach endgame content, and once they're fully built, they become the backbone of the strongest team compositions in the game. They aren't easy to obtain, but that's exactly why they're so rewarding. If you're wondering what your long-term goals should be, this entire tier is basically your checklist. Let's begin with Super Vegito in his transforming form. He's widely considered the strongest unit in the entire game, but unlocking him is no small task since he's hidden behind the brutal Dragon Ball Z tower. Because of that, newer players shouldn't rush toward him. Instead, focus on building powerful S-tier and meta units first. Eventually, when you finally unlock Super Vegito, he'll immediately become a permanent member of almost every endgame team. Eternal is unquestionably the best trait for him. Stalk in his resurrection form has become an absolute powerhouse after receiving several recent buffs and fixes. Instead of attacking a single location, he constantly hunts enemies across almost the entire map, giving him incredible coverage even without having true full area of effect attacks like Zid. His signature Metroletta attack is nothing short of devastating, capable of deleting entire waves and removing enormous chunks of health from even the toughest bosses. On top of that, every critical hit extends the range of his attacks, allowing him to pressure more enemies as combat continues. If you enjoy Infinite or Siege mode, Stalk is one of the most valuable units you can possibly own. Eternal is easily the trait to choose. Megumo with 10 Shadows is another character that feels almost unfair once you understand how his kit works. His power comes from 2 different sources, Megumo himself and his Mahoraga Summon. Megumo constantly strengthens himself through separate self-buff passives that increase damage while reducing cooldowns, and every 5th attack deals additional damage while lowering enemy damage reduction, scaling beautifully with attack speed buffs. Then, Mahoraga enters the battlefield and completely changes everything. As Mahoraga loses health, he continuously gains more damage reduction and stronger damage buffs, eventually transforming into an incredibly durable damage per second machine that even ignores a large portion of enemy damage reduction. Eternal is absolutely the best trait for this incredible duo. Buu in his kid form and Baozhen in his final form follow a very similar path, so it makes sense to talk about them together. Both are late game meta damage per second units that you'll eventually unlock by grinding boss rush content. The important thing is not to rush for them too early. They're strongest once you've already assembled a roster full of S tier characters, because that's when they begin replacing your older damage dealers rather than carrying your account from the beginning. Once they're finally part of your collection, both Buu and Baozhen become exceptional upgrades that fit naturally into high-end team compositions. As expected, Eternal is the ideal trait for both of them. If your favorite strategy is watching the entire battlefield disappear at once, Zid with Atomic is probably going to become your new best friend. After upgrading him into all-range Atomic, he literally attacks enemies across the entire map, making positioning almost irrelevant. Combine that ridiculous range with the naturally massive stats that come from being a secret unit, and you end up with one of the highest performing damage per second characters in the entire game. Infinite mode and siege mode are where Zid truly shines because his map-wide attacks never stop providing value. Eternal remains the perfect trait for maximizing everything he offers. Sun Jin Woo in his Monarch form is one of those units that keeps getting stronger the longer the battle lasts. He starts a little slower than some other top tier characters, and he reaches his full potential much faster alongside Igris. But even by himself, he's already an incredible carry. Whenever his health becomes low, he gains enormous boosts to damage, cooldown reduction, and lifesteal while also executing weaker non-boss enemies. Every defeated enemy permanently strengthens him, increasing his damage, cooldown reduction, lifesteal, execute threshold, and even improving several of his passive effects at specific kill counts. That's exactly why he's considered one of the strongest units for longer game modes, like Infinite. Eternal is unquestionably the best trait for him. Of course, you can't really talk about Sun Jin Woo without mentioning Igris in his Elite Knight form, because these two were practically designed to work together. Igris constantly gains damage every time he defeats an enemy, eventually reaching an incredible 100% damage increase. He also heals himself, applies devastating bleed damage, and naturally pressures healthier enemies, making it much easier for Sun Jin Woo to trigger his execute abilities later in the fight. When both units are deployed together, Igris gains additional damage and cooldown reduction, creating one of the strongest partnerships in the game. Even without Sun Jin Woo, Igris still performs well thanks to his own damage reduction buffs, although his overall ceiling isn't quite as high. Eternal is once again the trait you should prioritize. Looking at this entire S+ tier, one thing becomes crystal clear. These aren't simply stronger versions of lower tier characters. They completely redefine what a unit can accomplish in Anime Paradox X. Whether it's Super Vegito dominating every mode, Storak and Zid controlling the battlefield, Megumo unleashing Mahoraga, Buu and Baozhen taking over the late game, or the incredible partnership between Sun Jin Woo and Igris, every single one of these units has the power to carry an endgame account. If your goal is building the strongest possible roster, this is the finish line you've been working toward all along. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.